There is a quiet cemetery where more dreams are buried than in any graveyard you've ever walked through. It's not marked with headstones nor lined with flowers. It exists in the space between knowing what to do and actually doing it. That gap, the distance between intention and action, is where most visions, callings, and God-given assignments quietly suffocate. We live in an age flooded with knowledge. Our libraries overflow. Our devices buzz with endless streams of information. And yet, despite all this knowing, the world is still filled with people who never step into what they were created to accomplish. Knowledge alone has never changed a life. It is only knowledge applied, truth obeyed, and vision acted upon that brings transformation. Think of it. How many dreams have been lost because someone was waiting for the right time? How many callings went unanswered because of fear, hesitation, or the comfort of staying still? The difference between those who see their dreams fulfilled and those who mourn them in silence is not intelligence, resources, or opportunity. It is action. The fatal gap is one of the most subtle yet devastating realities in human life. It is not the absence of dreams that destroys people, nor even the absence of knowledge. Most people know more than enough to change their lives, to alter their circumstances, and to step into a future they've only dared to imagine. But there is a yawning distance between possessing that knowledge and actually translating it into action. This gap is rarely talked about, yet it is the graveyard of countless destinies. Dreams don't disappear overnight. They erode quietly in the space where intention is never converted into motion. A man can know the steps required to repair a broken relationship, yet years slip away without reconciliation because he never takes the first step. A woman can know how to build a business, write a book, or serve a cause, yet she remains frozen, waiting for a moment that never comes. In the end, it was not ignorance that destroyed them, but the fatal gap between knowing and doing. The tragedy of this gap lies in its deceptive comfort. Knowing something can create the illusion of progress. We feel wise when we've read the book, listened to the lecture, or outlined the plan. The mind tricks us into believing that information is the same as transformation. But a diet plan on the shelf never changes your health. A financial strategy in a notebook never builds wealth. A calling written in your journal never impacts another soul. We fall into the trap of mistaking knowledge for accomplishment, and in that deception, the dream quietly expires. The fatal gap is not measured in inches, but in choices postponed, opportunities overlooked, and obedience delayed. The scriptures often remind us that it is not the hearers of the word who are justified, but the doers. Knowledge without obedience is a mirage. It promises change, but delivers nothing. In fact, the more we know without acting, the more accountable we become for what we have neglected. The light we receive but fail to walk in eventually turns into a burden rather than a blessing. That is why this gap is so dangerous. It doesn't just delay progress, it erodes faith, weakens resolve, and cultivates regret. If you look back over your life, you may find the ghosts of abandoned callings lingering in that gap. The project you never started, the risk you never took, the conversation you avoided, the prayer you never prayed. All of them testify to what could have been if only knowing had given way to doing. And yet, the hope lies in this. The gap is not a permanent prison. It is a crossing we are invited to make daily. Every act of obedience, no matter how small, is a bridge laid across that chasm. Each step turns a dream into a reality and a vision into a testimony. The fatal gap is real, but it is not undefeatable. It demands courage, faith, and a willingness to act even when the path feels uncertain. Those who dare to step across discover that the future is not reserved for the most knowledgeable, but for the most obedient. The illusion of readiness is one of the most effective ways the enemy of your soul keeps you trapped in inactivity. It whispers the lie that you must wait until all the conditions are just right, until every piece is perfectly in place, before you can take action. Many dreams have been lost in that waiting room of perfection. People convince themselves that once they have more money, more time, more knowledge, more confidence, then they will finally begin. But perfection is a moving target, and readiness never arrives in the way we imagine. Life is not designed to offer perfect conditions. It requires us to step into obedience despite the imperfections. Those who wait for readiness discover too late that they were waiting for something that never comes. This illusion is powerful because it feels wise. After all, who would argue against preparation? Yet there is a line where preparation turns into procrastination and wisdom becomes a mask for fear. How many times have we said, "When things settle down, then I'll start"? The truth is that life rarely settles down, and waiting for smooth seas is the fastest way to ensure you never leave the shore. Readiness, as we imagine it, is often just another name for delay. What matters is not whether conditions are ideal, but whether we are willing to take the first step in faith. The illusion of readiness also creates an endless cycle of learning without applying. People read another book, attend another seminar, or listen to another sermon, convincing themselves they are just one insight away from beginning. But the reality is that most of us already know enough to get started. We don't need another wave of information. We need the courage to act on what we already possess. Every great accomplishment in history began in imperfect conditions with imperfect people who simply refused to wait. The first step is always taken with trembling hands and a racing heart. The danger of this illusion is that it robs us of time, and time is the one resource we can never recover. Days turn into years, and years into decades, while the dream remains locked away in the cage of preparation. The cost of waiting is not only lost opportunity, but also lost growth. Because readiness does not come before action, it is forged in the process of action. You do not become ready by waiting, you become ready by doing. The skills you lack are developed in the field, not in the classroom. The courage you long for is strengthened in the battle, not in the planning stage. Breaking free from this illusion requires a shift in perspective. Instead of asking, "Am I ready?" we must ask, "Am I willing?" Willingness is the seed of action, and action produces readiness. The secret is simple but profound. Start where you are, with what you have, and trust that what you need will be supplied along the way. The illusion of readiness disappears the moment you move forward in faith. Faith and action are inseparable. To claim one without the other is to misunderstand both. Knowledge alone can inspire the mind, but it is powerless to transform a life until it is set into motion. Faith works in much the same way. To say you believe, yet never step forward, is to live with an empty declaration. The truth is that faith without works is dead, just as knowing without doing is sterile. Action is the proof of faith, the visible evidence that you trust what you say you believe. Dreams remain only shadows until they are animated by obedience. Consider the farmer who holds seed in his hand. He may know the science of agriculture, the rhythms of the seasons, the promise hidden in that tiny kernel. Yet, if he never places it in the ground, he will starve with knowledge in his head and barrenness in his field. Faith is not just believing the seed will grow, it is putting it into the soil despite the uncertainty of weather and conditions. Knowledge and faith both demand expression, and that expression is action. Without it, all potential remains locked within, unfulfilled, and wasted. One of the most damaging lies is that belief alone is sufficient. People convince themselves that their conviction is enough, yet they never step into the reality of what they claim to believe. They talk of forgiveness, but never extend it. They speak of generosity, but never give. They declare trust in God, but refuse to obey when He calls them into uncomfortable territory. Words alone carry no weight. It is action that reveals authenticity. Just as a tree is known by its fruit, a life of faith is known by the steps it takes. When we move from knowing into doing, something extraordinary happens. Knowledge becomes wisdom because it is lived. Faith becomes sight because it is tested. Action activates the promises we cling to, turning abstract belief into tangible experience. This is why obedience is often described as the key to blessing. It is not in knowing the command that change occurs, but in doing it. The moment we act on what we believe, doors open, opportunities emerge, and growth begins. The gap between faith and action is often bridged by courage, because taking the step exposes us to risk. What if we fail? What if others ridicule us? What if the outcome is not what we expected? These questions haunt us, but faith answers them not with certainty of outcome, but with trust in the one who leads us. The act of obedience is never wasted, even when the results are not immediate, because it shapes character, strengthens resolve, and aligns us with the purposes of God. To believe is to begin, but to act is to live. The marriage of faith and action is the birthplace of every realized dream. Without action, belief is little more than theory. With action, belief becomes testimony, and it is testimony, not theory, that changes lives and shapes eternity. Fear is the silent warden of the prison where countless dreams are kept locked away. It disguises itself in many forms: fear of failure, fear of criticism, fear of the unknown, but its purpose is always the same: to keep us from stepping forward. Many people know exactly what they need to do, but fear whispers louder than faith and persuades them to stay where it feels safe. The tragedy is that safety is rarely safe. It is simply another name for stagnation. While fear promises protection, it delivers regret. The things we fear most rarely destroy us, but the things we refuse to attempt because of fear often leave scars that never heal. The fear of failure is among the most common. People hesitate because they imagine the embarrassment of falling short, of trying and not succeeding. Yet failure is rarely fatal. It is often the very teacher that equips us for future success. A child learning to walk stumbles countless times, but no parent scolds the child for falling. Each failure is progress. Why then do we, as adults, treat failure as a verdict instead of a step? The truth is that the absence of action is the only true failure. You cannot steer a parked car. You must be in motion for direction to matter. Another subtle fear is the fear of criticism. What will people think? What will they say? Many never step into their calling because they are more concerned with human approval than divine assignment. Yet critics will always exist. Those who risk nothing may avoid ridicule, but they also avoid significance. Every meaningful work has been opposed. Every pioneer has been misunderstood, and every leader has been criticized. If the voices of others hold more weight than the voice of God, your dream will never leave the ground. Then there is the fear of the unknown, the vast uncertainty of stepping into uncharted territory. We prefer the familiar, even if the familiar is unfulfilling. The wilderness is frightening, but it is also where manna falls and promises are revealed. The unknown is not empty. It is the canvas where God paints His greatest works. To stay in what is comfortable is to forfeit the miracles reserved for those willing to step out. Fear's strategy is paralysis. It convinces you to delay, to hesitate, to overthink. But the antidote to fear is not more knowledge or even more courage. It is action. Fear thrives in stillness, but it withers when confronted by forward movement. Each step you take diminishes its power. Each act of obedience silences its lies. The moment you act, fear loses its grip, because fear is strongest in imagination, but weakest in reality. Dreams disappear not because they were impossible, but because fear kept them unborn. The difference between those who live in regret and those who live in fulfillment is often nothing more than this: some bowed to fear, while others walked through it. The promise is not that fear will vanish, but that faith gives you strength to move in spite of it. Procrastination is one of the most polished disguises that delay wears, and it has robbed more people of their dreams than outright opposition ever has. Unlike fear, which feels sharp and obvious, procrastination often feels subtle and even justified. We tell ourselves we are waiting for the right time, that patience is a virtue, that we will begin tomorrow. But tomorrow is a thief that rarely delivers. Day by day, the dream is pushed further down the road until eventually it is lost. The deception of delay lies in its quietness. It rarely announces itself as destruction, but its end is the slow erosion of vision. One of the reasons delay is so dangerous is that it feels responsible. A person convinces themselves that they are not avoiding the dream, merely waiting for a more suitable season. They wait until the children are older, until finances are better, until stress is lower. While there is wisdom in timing, there is also folly in endless postponement. Life never becomes free of challenges. If we wait for every obstacle to move out of the way, we will die waiting. Progress requires movement in the midst of imperfection, not in the absence of it. The longer a dream is delayed, the weaker it becomes. Vision is like a flame. It must be fed or it will flicker out. Each day of procrastination makes the dream feel more distant and the effort to reach it more overwhelming. People who once burned with passion slowly lose heart, convincing themselves it was never meant to be. Yet the tragedy is not that the dream was impossible, but that it was neglected. Delay breeds doubt, and doubt suffocates desire. Procrastination also carries a spiritual weight. When God impresses something on our hearts, obedience delayed is often obedience denied. The opportunity of today may not be present tomorrow. There are windows of grace that open in specific seasons, and to wait too long is to miss them. Scripture warns us not to boast about tomorrow, for we do not know what a day may bring. Every act of obedience is urgent because tomorrow is never guaranteed. Dreams die not because they lacked potential, but because they were starved by delay. The deception of delay can only be broken by decisive action. A person must choose to begin, even in small ways, rather than waiting for the perfect moment. Small steps matter because each one breaks procrastination's grip and fuels momentum. The book is written one sentence at a time, the business is built one customer at a time, the relationship is healed one conversation at a time. Waiting accomplishes nothing, but movement, however small, awakens hope. In the end, delay is not neutral, it is destructive. It is the slow poison that drains a life of purpose. The only cure is to treat obedience as urgent, to act now rather than later, to recognize that the best time to begin is not tomorrow, but today. The deception of delay is broken the moment you choose to start. Obedience has always been the dividing line between those who merely hear and those who truly live. Success is not found in accumulating more knowledge, but in applying the knowledge we already possess. The world is full of people who know what they should do, how to live healthier, how to build stronger relationships, how to step into their calling, yet very few actually do it. The difference is not intelligence, opportunity, or even passion. The difference is obedience. To obey is to act on what you know, even when it feels inconvenient, uncomfortable, or costly. The power of obedience lies in its ability to unlock doors that knowledge alone cannot open. A person can study the theory of swimming for years, but unless they step into the water, they will never experience the reality of it. In the same way, we can fill journals with insights, underline verses in our Bibles, or attend countless seminars, but until we obey the truth we have been shown, our lives remain unchanged. Obedience is the bridge between information and transformation. It turns abstract principles into lived reality, and it is in that living that true success is found. Obedience often requires surrendering our desire for control. We want to see the outcome before we take the step, but obedience asks us to trust without full visibility. Abraham did not know every detail of the land he was promised. He simply obeyed and went. Peter did not know how he would walk on water. He simply obeyed when he was told to come. Each act of obedience carries a measure of uncertainty, but also the certainty of God's presence in the step. Success is not guaranteed by our ability to predict results, but by our willingness to follow faithfully. It is also important to recognize that obedience is rarely dramatic. It is often simple and ordinary. The daily choice to rise early and pray, the quiet decision to forgive, the discipline of working diligently when no one is watching, these are the acts of obedience that shape destinies. People often wait for grand opportunities, overlooking the small steps that prepare them for greater assignments. Yet, it is in the little acts of obedience that character is forged, and character is the foundation of lasting success. Disobedience, on the other hand, carries hidden costs. Knowing what to do, but refusing to act, builds layers of regret. It deadens the conscience and erodes confidence. Each time we resist obedience, it becomes easier to resist again until we no longer feel the urgency of the call, but obedience restores vitality. Each act of obedience strengthens faith, clears the conscience, and builds momentum. The power of obedience is that it multiplies. One step leads to another, and suddenly what once seemed impossible becomes a lived reality. Obedience is not about knowing more. It is about doing what you already know. The future belongs not to the most informed, but to the most faithful. Dreams move from possibility to fulfillment when obedience becomes the rhythm of our lives. Crossing the gap between knowing and doing is never a single leap. It is a series of small, deliberate steps. Too often we imagine that realizing our dreams requires a grand gesture, a monumental act of courage, or a perfect plan executed flawlessly. In reality, it is the small, consistent acts of obedience that bridge the distance between vision and fulfillment. A dream is never realized in one moment, but is built brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. The secret is not extraordinary effort, but faithful persistence. The reason small steps are so powerful is that they are attainable. The mountain may look impossible from the base, but one step forward brings you closer to the summit. When we focus only on the size of the dream, we grow intimidated and paralyzed. But when we break it down into the next right action, progress becomes possible. Write one page, make one phone call, take one walk, say one prayer. Over time, those small steps accumulate, and what once felt impossible becomes inevitable. Great testimonies are the sum of countless small obediences strung together. Crossing the gap also requires focus. Distractions are everywhere, pulling us in 1,000 directions and draining the energy needed to pursue what matters most. The person who chases everything achieves nothing, but the one who prioritizes obedience in a single direction sees fruit. Dreams demand focus because half-hearted effort never produces wholehearted results. This focus is sustained not by sheer willpower, but by a clear sense of purpose, an unshakable conviction that what you are pursuing is worth the sacrifice. Another key to crossing the gap is perseverance. Dreams are not fulfilled overnight, and obstacles are guaranteed. There will be setbacks, delays, and disappointments. Many give up too soon, mistaking resistance for a closed door. But resistance often proves the importance of the assignment. The enemy does not oppose what poses no threat. Perseverance is what separates the dreamer from the achiever, the willingness to endure difficulty for the sake of the promise. Each act of perseverance builds resilience, and resilience ensures that the dream survives long enough to bear fruit. The most encouraging truth is that we are not asked to cross the gap in our own strength. God's grace meets us in every step of obedience, supplying what we lack. Where our strength fails, His strength sustains. Where our vision blurs, His guidance clarifies. The act of moving forward, even imperfectly, invites divine partnership. And with that partnership, no gap is too wide to cross. In the end, crossing the gap is not about heroics, but about faithfulness. It is about choosing to do what you already know to do, one step at a time, until the dream that once lived only in your heart becomes visible in your life. The gap is where most dreams disappear, but it can also be the place where your dream finally begins, if you choose to step.